How you doing, mate?
I've asked one of my past students, Phil, to join me tonight, because he called me last week and harassed me, and I thought what he harassed me about is something that a lot of you will find useful and beneficial in terms of understanding how it really is in arboriculture. So, Phil, I get a phone call last week. We're not going to talk about the subject of the things in the dispute because it's a matter before the courts, but you got you were in Sydney. You were before the Land Environment Court, and you were there as an expert witness. And that's something that all of us are going to do at some stage or other. Hopefully, I think it's a great job. And I guess from your voice when you called that you were anxious. Would that be a fair comment?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Why?
Yeah, definitely. Like
I mean, you're one of the bright students in the class. Why were you concerned?
for me personally, I'd say that it's the theatre of the whole court process and the, I think just the type of people you deal with, like barristers and solicitors, like they just have a different way of dealing with things. Like, you know, from my day to day, I speak to people and it's a lot more relaxed, and the way that they kind of approach it, it's very, very professional, very official. There's procedure and process. And I think it's the level of detail that they go to on very small things in terms of even submitting documents through the court. You can tell so it kind of adds layers of complexity to make sure that you need to be doing the right thing. And I think that you feel the weight, you feel the pressure. I mean, some jobs might go for a year, some jobs might go for multiple years. A lot of people spend a lot of money on the court process, developers, the council. But there's a lot goes into it that can lead up to the trial or hearing. So that you can feel the weight, you can feel all the momentum building to that one moment. It's kind of like a footy grand final. You train all year and
Yep.
suddenly it's the big night and you got to stand up and make sure that you have the information correct. So,
And there's a big difference between having an opinion and feeling comfortable expressing that opinion in a clear and persuasive manner.
yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you had your thoughts about what was happening, but trying to articulate that and feeling comfortable articulating that. And I can share at one stage there, Phil said, well, these are some of the questions they might ask. So I'm going to write down answers and just read the answers out. And I said, oh, no, you're not going to get away with that. You have to feel comfortable with copying whatever they give you, and they can give you some curlies. And that's in part the role of an advocate. One of the things you can find a lot of consolation in as an expert is you are there not for your client. I take time now to make sure my clients have been told and that they're very aware that my role as an expert is to serve the court. I'm not there for either party. I'm there for the court. So whilst I might be their arborist, I'm working for the court. They just agreed to pick up my bill. That's their role. And that makes a difference, getting that out front. And then talking about the reality of how the cases can go. That the court makes decisions based on merit, based on how they see things, even in a criminal matter. And I've got a number of those. The court still sees things as it sees it. It's not my job to make the decision. Phil, we discussed some things over a period of about 3 hours or so, over 2 days. So we had some backwards and forwards. I wanted to make sure that Phil was as well prepared and as comfortable as possible. What things did you learn from that dialogue that you thought were valuable to you?
There was a few really good key points, I think, that stood out to me. One of them was, let me think if there's a way of just presenting these points in order so it makes more sense. I would say the first one that really stuck with me is just your advice to kind of, and it wasn't, you didn't say let it flow, but that were the words that came to my head. I definitely am a person. I spend most of my time behind the computer, like talking. I mean, I talk through my typing. When you're typing things out, you get the opportunity to go back, reread it, write it. I'm not a speed typer. I still do the two fingers, and I say that's great because it makes me think about what I'm typing before I type it. So I'm known for, I think I do very well written emails and reports, and in the way that, you know, I'm communicating the way I want to say it. I know that when it gets to the read, I'm very fussy. It might not be the best way, but it's the way that I want to say it. I think what I struggle with is when, especially like, I'm not talking to people day in and day out or doing this type of thing, which is communicating what you want to say on the fly, on the spot. And I think I was very concerned with anyone who knows me. I'd say I'm pretty relaxed in the way that I talk. You know, I use a lot of slang. I just say, "G'day, how you going, mate? It's all good." You know, I just use all that type of lingo. And in a professional setting, when you're in the court, I think I was thinking about that. And Mark said to me, like, I'd written things out the way that I thought that I should present that information. And Mark said, well, you're not going to be able to read out of your paper. You know, we did a few practice questions and I was, oh yeah, no worries. I have the answer to that. And I'd sit down and I'd start reading what I'd typed. And yeah, Mark pointed out, you can't do that. You have to actually give your opinion as a
question that's being asked.
A stream of thought that's coming straight from the brain through the mouth. And where definitely the first few questions that you were asking me, Mark, you were saying like, you know, what is this? And I was too busy worried about how I was saying things. And I wasn't actually communicating my points clearly or coherently. And Mark said, just you talk the way you talk and just say it the way you feel, say it. And as soon as I started to relax a little bit and just talk as if I was having a conversation like right now or with a mate, I could still present all of my ideas and communicate my ideas and my opinions, but I was doing it in a clearer way because I wasn't. There's enough that you've got enough things to think about when you're in there on the spot. You don't need to add another layer of that, trying to talk like someone you are not.
Exactly. It's be genuine, be you. When we write differently than the way we speak. Or we mostly do. And as your writing skills improve, they'll become distinctly different to the way that you speak. Because you have the time to craft, rethink, go back. When you're speaking, you don't have that opportunity. And I think I relate to you. I remember going into court and a friend of mine, Scott Gatenby, another arborist, lovely guy, rocked up in a open-necked shirt, no tie, his hair back into a ponytail. And I thought, oh, and I realized that often we have these apprehensions about court. Now, certainly being presented is fine, but most of my stuff starts out in the field. And I said to Phil, I'm quite comfortable wearing a polo shirt into the court for a land environment court matter. I'm happy to do it in the local court. If I was doing something in the district or Supreme Court, I'd probably put a collar and tie on, maybe a jacket. But you are who you are. And, you know, I hadn't seen for a while, and he's clearly got this lovely mullet. I sit there and think, wow, you know, my mother would tell me, cut the mullet off, get yourself shut. World's not like that. So don't, yeah, it's awesome, awesome. Lovely lady. So be yourself. And the same is true when you're writing. Even though you're getting time to craft your responses, they've still got to genuinely reflect you and your thoughts. And that's a hard process, even in the written form. And remember, the purpose of a report is to communicate, or the purpose of expert testimony is to communicate and answer really specific questions. And sometimes, and Phil's right, those questions are there, you might think, to try and trick you up. But that's not the reality. The truth is that they're there to try and explore your information and try and get to the base of it. So whilst the legal teams are advocates and they are adversarial, you needn't think of it as trying to prove something or not. It's just them exploring, they're mining into the idea and the concept that you've said, and they want to know more. And so trying to be genuine and communicate clearly is a really important part of that. Okay, so that was one really important thing that you learned. What else did you learn? Anything?
Yeah. Let me just have a think. One of it would be, taking time to think about things before you answer the question. Give yourself a bit of breathing space.
Can you explain that more?
So, just like what I guess I did then, where you want to give the best answer that you can give to assist the court in making decisions. You don't want to rush in and give the fastest answer. It's not necessarily a race. So, you more than welcome to take time to say, hey, like, can you repeat the question, or just, let me think about that. Have a thought, let it flow in your mind a little bit, and then think about what you want to say and then say it. There's no point answering. It's not, like, you don't have to, it's not, you're not playing a game show.
Being a smarter.
Wins.
Yeah. And I think I shared with you that, my quick-wittedness and my quick use of responses is probably a negative in some ways versus Phil's more laid-back approach, because I will give a really quick and smart, in inverted commas, answer, and that sometimes can alienate people. In fact, I remember a large judgment that came out of a district court, which is the equivalent of the Supreme Court in New South Wales, district court in Victoria, and the judge spent 6 pages tearing the other expert to shreds for being partisan in their approach. And the judge said, Mr. Hartley is very abrupt in his evidence. I'm a yes, no. And again, it's who I am. So when I read that, I thought, wow, I'm comfortable with that. I don't need to feel like I'm somehow or other nice and sweet and eloquent, because those that know me know that I'm not that sort of a person. So your personalities will have some influence, but it's the truth of what you're saying and how you're getting to the depth of the question that's being asked that's really important. And if that means that the answer to a question is something you haven't thought of before, and you have to change or undo something that you've done, that's a really important part. There's a great judgment a number of years ago where an arborist said the tree had a trunk diameter of 15 meters. Now, it was a fig, and the largest tree in the world, the cypress of Chul, in terms of diameter, is around that sort of order of magnitude and size. So clearly it wasn't correct. And the arborist was asked, he said, you mean circumference and not diameter? And he said, no. 3 times he said, no, it's definitely the circumference. And I talked to him about it when I saw him later on. I said, why did you say it was the diameter, not the circumference? He said, I'd made a mistake, and I was always taught that if you make a mistake in your evidence, stick by it, don't change it. Well, he's absolutely right if you're the defendant, okay? You are not a defendant in a court as an expert witness. You are there to serve the court and not to defend yourself. I've made a mistake, Your Honour. No, it was 15 meters circumference, 5 meters diameter, and that's the way you handle that. And yes,
could I say something here, Mark?
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
I think it's thinking about doing something like this for the first time or early on. You're trying to do your best, obviously, but you're not going to win all of these. And sometimes your counterpart's evidence will be preferred to your own. And, that's not easy to take, but you don't have to win all the time. You don't have to give perfect answers. You don't have to wipe the floor. You just have to do.
In fact, Peter, it's not your job to win.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's one of
right.
the things that I always worry about when I see an arborist, and I said this to Phil, when you say I've done all these court cases and I've won all these cases, when I read an arborist report that says that, I think, hang on a second, that's not his job. His job is to take a non-partisan position, and that means that sometimes he's going to be on the side of the losing side, and he still gets to do the job. Your
That's right.
job is not to win. You're not an advocate. You're not a combatant in the process. You're purely taking complex stuff that the court's not experts on and giving them that expertise. And you know, as a good expert, you will say to your clients regularly, look, I don't like your chances. I've got one at the moment. I said, you know, 20% chance of the tree surviving, 80% that it's going to go. But that's their choice then, you know, not mine. And it's not mine to win, it's mine to give the evidence. And if I can come out of it with my evidence being good and clear and concise and understandable, and it's sufficient enough to have some standing in the situation, that's great. And you know, one of the cases that I think Peter was around when you're a student, one of the commissioners said, despite Mr. Hartley's calculations, we believe. So they looked at all my calculations and said, well, we don't accept that. And I'm sitting thinking, well, the maths is all right and there's none of it's wrong. Why is it? And it's because the court also has other things that they consider. They have to weigh the merit of the situation up. And so if you think you're going into a court where people don't come in with cognitive biases, you're going to be sadly deluded. You know, one of the things I often say to clients is the only certainty in law, the only certainty is that the legal team will get richer. And I'm on the legal team, so you will make me richer in this process. The end result, I've seen things that I thought were absolutely unlosable go down. And I've seen things that I thought would never, ever, ever win. And I tell a true story of a lady in a district court action who fell over in a store, a supermarket. She sued them. In the hearing, it comes out that she'd tripped over dozens of times. She'd had the ambulance called out to her house to pick her up. She had progressive MS. She was constantly falling over. She'd broken her nose several times. And here she was suing a supermarket for exactly that process. And as the evidence came out, I'm sitting there thinking, oh, hell, there's no way she'll win. And the judge found in her favor. Why? A diddly little old lady sitting there looking very sweet and innocent and, you know, a big corporation. The judge brought to bear his own biases. As I was walking out, the barrister for the other side said, we'll appeal this. And my response was, no, I wouldn't if I was you. My mother will hit the media and she'll smear your name. So I didn't think my mother had any right to that things, but the court makes the decisions that it wants, not us. Okay, so as an expert, don't worry about what the judge is going to say. Don't worry about the judgment. Just worry about presenting your information. Okay, great, Phil. Excellent. What else?
I'd say it's really good to just focus on the contentions. I guess, like, at least leading up to a hearing. Like, something that I think about a lot is I do a lot of developments. I don't do a lot of the risk or tree disputes between neighbors, but development's kind of what I focus on and often end up in court. But I see it as a really good process for your assessment. So you need to approach a job. I think the way that I approach it is I assume that everything may end up in court from the beginning. Absolutely. You need to identify issues early, like if I'll just talk development because I don't really know, like that's probably more experience in, but you know, you need to communicate all the issues early to the client. You're not there to try and do them any favors. Like you have to say, oh, here's a red flag that might get picked up. Council might not like this. Help them navigate through the process to resolve those type of issues. Through the whole process, like as Mark would know, like there's opportunities usually where there's discussions, between the applicant and the council, or the two opposing sides, I would say. And that gives the opportunity for experts from KIT. So if I'm working for the applicant or the developer, the council's expert will be able to review, comment on the work. There's without prejudice discussions. So that's where it's kind of a very open form communication. Just no one's held to anything. You can just sit there and talk about issues. So it's a really good process to go through of just the way I think of it is I'm doing an assessment, I'm presenting my work, and it's being reviewed at multiple stages throughout that process. And where there's gaps and identified, it's like Mark said, you have to acknowledge where those gaps are and try and fill the gaps. So that's the way I think of it. Like a good example is one that I did recently where I'd done an assessment. The council's arborist said, oh, look, we think you've miscalculated impacts on trees because there's a retaining wall and there's excavation might be required for over excavation for the retaining wall. So it's not up to me to necessarily say, I don't think this and start arguing with them, but I have to investigate that. And so I talked to the engineer who's proposing the retaining wall. He's done the drawings. He's the expert in the retaining wall. So you've got to talk to the engineer and say, hey, this has been raised. How much excavation is required beyond the line that you've drawn on your plans to install that retaining wall? And then they come back, they say, okay, there's 500 mil that excavation is required. So then I go back and then I reassess based on an additional 500 mil buffer from that retaining wall. And then I rerun my calculations and present those results. It's a good process for sharpening. It's something that you might not think of. So it's best to approach it from that point of view. I think when I look at it and I say, okay, I take pride in accuracy and precision in my assessment. So number one, if I go into if I'm doing a job and it ends up in court, the first thing I do is think about the accuracy. Well, I think about it from the beginning anyway, the accuracy and precision. I forgot what I was going to say, and I had a good point. It was.
Well, I'm probably slightly different because we're talking accuracy and precision, and they're two different words in terms of what they want. Accuracy is right or not. Precision is whether you're always in the same general area. So you could be very precisely inaccurate. Okay. But I look at it and say, look, is what I'm suggesting so unreasonable that it's way out of the ballpark? So yes, it might have been 50 centimeters of over excavation is going to happen, maybe even a meter. Would that generally have made a difference in this situation? And in most cases, and I think it's the same for all of us, in most cases, we're dealing with things that an extra meter is probably not going to make much difference. I mean, when I look at a tree, the first thing I say is that tree is not accurately surveyed. I know it's shown on a survey plan accurately, but in most cases, even if he's using a sub 3 centimeter accurate GIS system, and he's shot the trunk, which side did he shoot? So when he comes back and he plots them, there'll be slight variations. Or when she does them, she's not shooting them from 3 spots and triangulating the trunk into that spot. And that's a common thing we see. So the time when you need to have the greatest attention to detail is as you're getting closer and closer and closer to that tree. If the tree's being retained, you definitely need to. If you're thinking, look, I'm 12 times trunk diameter away, it's not a problem. It turns out that you're actually 11 or 10 times. It's probably not a big deal at all. But if you're 3 times trunk diameter away, it starts to become really significant, because one more trunk diameter can be the difference between success and complete failure.
Yeah.
Now I want to go back to one of the earlier questions, Phil, if I can, and that was or one of your answers. You said stopping, and I gave you some advice. I said before you give any answer, take a pause and a big breath in, and then think about what your answer is. In fact, if you want, even jot down some points. Don't feel that there's a rush for you to reply. There's no a judge hearing you spurt out an answer quickly is not going to be any more convinced than somebody who talks slowly like a country bumpkin but gets the point clearly across. And that's why I said, don't worry about you're sounding like you're a little bit of a knocker, because you are. And that's a part of the charm. The real trouble is when you try not to sound who you are, when you try and emulate somebody else or emulate something that you're not. You then think your brain is functioning on two things at once, and it doesn't like doing that. So just let your spoken form. Now, if you're worried about it, go to elocution lessons, go to speaking lessons, join up with the public speaking things and work on that as a thing. But it's not as big an issue as you would think. Okay?
Yeah.
So
I
pause,
agree.
breath in, pause, breath in, big breath.
I agree with you, Mark, like that. I think it sounds like disingenuous too if you're trying to be like, I think what you're trying to do is give genuine answers. And I think if you're too busy focused on trying to be someone you're not, like most people would look at that and say, oh, this guy's not, it's not a genuine answer to the question. So
I think it brings that sort of degree of questionability. And I've often said this about how we, even in our written form, if you're not a person with a exquisite vocabulary, don't try and use unusual words. Otherwise, you end up sounding like you're very photosynthesis. And there are reports, and I read them. In fact, we took the word contiguous out of the standard because we figured that most people, the first time they hear that word, would look it up. And we said, well, it just doesn't sound like the average arborist. Now, I'm not saying that all arborists are silly at all. I'm saying communication, simple communication is really important. And so, don't try and be ultra sophisticated with your choice of language. And another thing I said to you, and I feel, was you're not there to tell the court what it should do. So you should do this, or you should do that, or the court should do this. You're there to tell the court the stuff that it needs to do so it can determine what it should do. And it's a real temptation for us as arborists, because we like to solve problems, to say, well, you should do this. It's very different with the court. You need to be leaving things more open. You could do this, 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 or this. And here's the advantages and the disadvantages. 1, 2, 3, 4. Phil, we talked about joint expert statements.
Yeah.
You remember us discussing that?
Yeah. No, that's definitely a really good point. So when you're preparing a joint expert report, there's different stages. You go without prejudice meetings, which is open discussion. Then you'll have a Section 34 conference, which is more of an official discussion between the different parties where you're trying to look at resolving issues, what can be done. If that doesn't really, I think as arborists, a lot of what we do might get resolved, either without prejudice or Section 34 conferences, which means that both parties end up coming to an agreement. They can kind of agree. It's negotiation. They massage building footprints and whatnot to try and find an agreement, and it gets resolved. If it doesn't, it goes to joint expert reporting, which is essentially you're given a list of contentions and ordered by the court to prepare a joint expert report based on those contentions. So there might be 1 or 2, there might be 50, depending on how many things you manage to resolve up until that point. Some of them can come out of the blue. So I've done projects at 3 or 4 years, and then not a single tree issue, and then 4 weeks out from a hearing, joint expert report, all these contentions get raised. So you're there as an expert to address those contentions with the other expert. When you're doing a joint report, basically the format that I've always used is a report style template with text, paragraphs, numbering, dot points, all that type of thing, like an official A4 style. And you'll have the contention listed. Then you'll have one expert. So Phil Witten, it will be PW says, or my opinion is this, and then you respond to that contention. So it might be tree 4 hasn't been accurately assessed. The encroachment has been calculated at 27. We think it's 35. And you say, well, I think my encroachment calculation is correct for XYZ reasons, and you attach a plan, or you can refer to other documents, for example. So you'll have different opinions, and you'll have a section. Sorry, if you agree, you'll have a section where you agree. Ultimately, if you can find things you agree on, that's always a good start. Mark mentioned, so I've had trouble in the past with
how to format that.
Formatting, and also it's very easy to be talking to someone and go off on a tangent, kind of like what I just did then. With the contentions, you want to address those contentions like very accurately. So Mark's mentioned, told me about the way that he formats. It's actually a completely different format, like a table style format, whereas a contention, a column for each of the experts, it might be an agreement column. PW says this column, and Mr. Hartley says this column. And what it does, it almost creates a visual, and it really boxes in the discussions that you're having and the thoughts that are being presented.
Yeah, complete thoughts on every issue that's in disagreement is in the one spot. So you're not going up and down. You're not wanting to see. Again, the purpose of your expert report is to communicate to the judge the things that you agree on, because they're now resolved. We're not going to waste time of the court. And, in many ways, the Land and Environment Court has driven this process worldwide. It's brilliant. Then when you come to give evidence, you're on a stand together in a hot box. You could have 2 or 3 or 4 experts sitting on the stand answering questions at the same time, concurrent witnesses. And so what they want is, well, Phil, you say this, Mark, you say this, this is an area of disagreement. And then each party wants to try and drill down into that and try and find out why that difference. As experts, the theory is we should all agree on everything. The reality is, as experts, we shouldn't agree on things. David Evans has a wonderful little phrase, and I think it's just brilliant. It says, whenever two arborists agree, one of them must be wrong. And I think that's got a lot of truth to it, and that, arboriculture is still a very young science, and there's still lots that we're learning. Things that Peter and I learned, Peter, we won't say, but 30, 40 years ago, have changed markedly. And, it's things have gone backwards and forwards. I mean, I dread to think plant names, for example, but all sorts of things are changing, and it's important that we be prepared to defend our opinions. And sometimes I would have to say probably in arboriculture, maybe 70 to 80% of what we express is simply that. It's an opinion. We wouldn't be able to back it up with peer-reviewed papers. That's what I was taught. Co-dominant stem, trees with co-dominant stems are more likely to fail. Now we know that that's probably not correct. And then some new research in 10 years' time might show something completely different again, that they are a difference. There's lots of variation. So being able to have the issue that you don't agree on, and then what each party's opinion is right beside each other, just helps the communication process. And then I said to Phil, and I'll say it to you, if you've got a chance to direct and control that, you want to get your stuff down first. let them get their stuff down. You put their stuff in for them if you're doing the secretarial role, and then at the end of it all, you're going to go backwards and forwards probably a couple of times, because you want to understand what they've said. And there's a really great little exercise I did many years ago where before you could argue with somebody, you had to repeat back what they were saying. And I remember going through this exercise, and I was about to critique the person and show them why what they said was wrong. And so I gave it back to them, and halfway giving it back to them, I said, "Oh, I see, you're right." And so this process of developing the joint expert statement, in part, is about allowing yourselves to do that. See if there are areas where you still can come to an agreement. And it might only be on a part of that contention, but some agreement is better than no agreement.
And Mark, something, and you can correct me if I'm wrong with this, but the way I think of it too is just from the process of doing this a few times, is that there almost seems to be two levels of disagreement with things. So one is your assessment itself, and one is the proposal or the results of the assessment. So I mean, I'll just talk about development, but the first thing I do when I go into this is I want to try and get agreement with my counterpart that my assessment is accurate. So that's the first thing I do, because then at least we agree, well, I've assessed everything accurately. When I say,
can I interrupt that and put it perhaps a different way?
Yeah.
The observations, the facts, shouldn't vary.
Yeah.
What sort of tree it is? Yes, if you think it's a different tree, we should be looking at trying to narrow that down. You say it's got a trunk diameter of 71 centimeters. I say it's got a trunk diameter of 91 centimeters. We need to remeasure. There's something that's not right. So the observational facts should always be in agreement. Where they disagree, there's both parties need to try and figure out where that is. The interpretation of the stuff, the opinionated stuff, is where you will disagree and should disagree. And again, you made a comment, Phil, whilst you're talking. You said that if I was on the other side, you'd have just said, forget it, I'm leaving. You should be quite happy to have a different opinion to me and feel comfortable with being in there. And I remember a friend of mine being in court, and I thought, this is going to be really tragic. And it was. The judge accepted what he said and couldn't accept what I said. It was tragic. So again, the acceptance of an opinion is in part based on sincerity. And I often say there are arborists out there that are just horrible, that say things that I just think, you've clearly had a frontal lobotomy and survived. And they'll make these comments and write these things, and I think nobody's ever going to believe it. And then I watch a client implement it, and I think, oh my, yes, nothing sells sincerity like sincerity itself. Even if you're wrong, you can still sound sincere. And that's how con men work, of course. But you don't have to be a con man to do that. You just have to be ignorant. And we've all seen that. What I don't know, if I don't know, and this is the Dunning-Kruger effect, people that don't know a lot can often come over more believable and convincing than people that know a lot, because the people that know a lot are sitting there saying, well, yes, but there are alternatives. The person that is often very lacking in knowledge will say, oh, no, there's only one way that you can deal with a tree like this. You need to lop it. And I read that in a report only a few weeks ago. Still to this day. I think we reviewed a report a while back, Peter, where we looked at the tree needed to be removed because there was mycelium in the mulch. How scary. And he genuinely believed it. I don't think he was doing it because he was a con man. He was sincere enough that people believed. So, yeah, excellent. Phil, are you happy to answer any questions from others around just quickly? Anyone got a question
Happy
for
to.
Phil before it disappears?
Bill,
You
how
can
many
disappear if you
court
want to.
cases have you been involved with? I thought from the introduction that this was a completely new thing, but apparently it's not.
Ah.
A few, like probably maybe 30 or something like that.
Oh,
I I the reason I was probably panicking a little bit the other day is because I tend to find that I can resolve the issues before it gets to a hearing, which is like I talked about before, just the different mechanisms that are in place to resolve it. But and this one particularly, it was like a 5-year project, lot of money spent, and it was all coming to a very, very like quick conclusion. So, and I just yes, and I'd been sitting in the hotel room and in and out of court for about 4 days, and I hadn't said much because I hadn't spoken to many, and I said I need to speak to another arborist and try and get those vocal cords like fluid and just the connection between my brain. That's why, I mean, to be honest, that's another good tip. I think like one of the reasons I called Mark is because I said I just need to like coherently like verbalize my thoughts. I can talk to myself in my hotel room for as long as I want, but it's not the same as talking to somebody else. And it's almost like a you know, like stretching before going to the gym. That's what I like explained it like, is like talking to another arborist for half an hour before you get asked questions or talk to, just helps everything flow a little bit more and gets that brain thinking. So like I said, yeah, just spend a lot of time thinking about stuff but not talking about it. So that was really helpful for me. And I said to Mark, I'm going to book him again 1 hour every hour before my next court case.
The mind conversation is very different, because in the mind conversation, it's perfect. There's a difference when you start to actually verbalize it, because it's so different than what you expect. And I mean, you watched a witness the other day just being absolutely roasted. And that's the other thing. We're afraid of what happens if you criticize. Well, I can tell you, if you go have a search for Mark Hartley and the Land Environment Court, there'll be several judgments there that are really scathing, where the court said, hey, no, wrong. And that's not the end of your career at all. It's how you learn.
and that's what I was alluding to earlier. I found, talking about getting some practice, I've found that there's invariably discussions with a barrister on, let's say, I know this is not correct, but our side. And often the grilling that they give you is fiercer than the opposing barrister, because they want to know, if this question gets asked, they want to know what you're going to say. And I think that that's a very useful thing about, you know, getting your ducks in a row and getting your head around what sort of things are likely to come up.
Yeah.
I agree, Peter. And I think another thing that's a really good habit is to, if you are having troubles with the other side's argument, is to give the barrister questions to ask that let them explore, you know, why this or why that, or because
you've usually got the opportunity to pass those sort of questions on to your solicitor, who will then let the barrister know
before the case
well,
goes.
Even during the matter,
Yes.
Yeah,
although the hot pot is a slightly different feeling, because you're
obviously you can't do it when you're on the stand, but you can certainly do it through the proceedings.
Yes, and look, but before, if you're having troubles with understanding the other side and you think there's genuine issues, then trying to get to the core of why that is. And sometimes you'll find, and I'm not saying it's the case, but sometimes you'll find the expert, rather than trying to resolve things, wants to become contentious. Hard to believe. But sometimes it's very adversarial, even at that stage. And you come to very little agreement, even on things that are poignantly obvious. So yeah, excellent. Well, Phil, I thank you for coming along. Feel free to stay on with us if you want. I've just got a few questions that I'd like to go over for others. to hear, but I do appreciate you sharing that in terms of what you've done. Was that useful, people?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Phil.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks a lot,
definitely.
guys.
Thanks for
Yeah,
that.
that was great, Phil. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Would everyone say he's relatively
And Mark.
articulate?
Oh, yeah.
You have no problems expressing yourself, and so that's what I'm saying. Just be the real you, Phil, and the real you communicates.
Oh, thanks a lot. Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. Like, I owe you a lot, Mark. So you've
No, happy, Phil.
Yes.
Great. And to show you the sort of person that Phil is, and I hope you don't mind me, but Phil got his diploma whilst he was a student of mine. He actually went out and acquired it from a place that rapidly delivered the diploma. And he said, I've got a problem in that whilst I have the diploma in arboriculture, I know I don't have the accompanying knowledge. So he continued on coming to class and completed and got his TAFE diploma as well. The reason he bought one, his work required him to have one. And so he went out and said, well, okay, I bought. And that shows you the caliber of the character that he has. There are others that go the opposite and say, well, I bought one. I must be really good because they've given me a diploma. And I can think of at least 2 or 3 that fit into that category. So well done, Phil.
Is it best value training I ever got? Like what? A couple of $1,000 or something for 3 years worth of Mark.
Oh, yes. It was
good.
well done.
I was trying to sign back up after I left.
Yeah. I'll never go back to those days, I don't think, in my lifetime.
Yeah, that's a
So
shame.
thanks for that, Bill.
No worries. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
Okay, I've got one here, interestingly. I don't know where from. Oh, yes, I do. America, from Todd McNeil. And Todd says, during an anatomy workshop in San Antonio, Mark discussed the use of lanolin to assist wound occlusion. Is it limited to certain species? The answer is it's limited to all trees with parenchyma, whatever that is, living cells. So rays are living cells. So lanolin will help stimulate callus production, and then callus will form wound wood, callus will form bark. The purpose of callus is to reset the vascular system. So yes, but it's only good for face wounds. That is when stuff's taken off the outside edge, not for pruning wounds. And it's to do with the orientation of the tissue. Parenchyma can divide in and out. So if you take the bark off, hit it with a car, hit it with a bobcat, you can scribe the edges, put lanolin on, and have the wound grow back from the face. Cambium can divide, or parenchyma can divide sideways, so it can take up the extra circumference. So we have a double win when we have lots of parenchyma growing out from the face of a wound. It can go side to side and in and out. It can't go up and down. So when you make a pruning cut, the only part that you can make move more rapidly is the stuff on the outer edge, and that increases ram's horning, and that's what we don't want. So all trees that we know of, in fact, lanolin's used to stimulate the parenchyma in orchids. So it's not just it's used as a grafting compound. So it's not just trees, but for us, the advantage of it is you knock the bark off, scribe it, and treat it. You're 70-80% of the way there if you can do it within the first few days. If it gets to a week or 2 weeks, my answer is still do it. I've seen stuff respond a week or 2 weeks afterwards. It's just the rate of response is slower and less effective. So the quicker you treat, same day is ideal. Within a few days, if it's wet and overcast, you've got longer. If it's a 40-degree day and you wait 3 or 4 days, you're really getting past your window quite quickly. Does that make sense? Hopefully, Todd, if you're in there or you're listening in later on, that answers that question for you. Next one. Yes, we'll do those answers to those questions next time round. Next one is a picture of a tree from Niels. And Niels, I haven't logged on the other computer because I'm away. I can, but It's a picture of a tree with lots of grafted sections, where we've got what the Indigenous community often describe as ring trees or marker trees, where parts are grafted to form a shape of some description.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of questions about that. The first question I always have is, how old are the branches? So
Definitely not 200 years old.
yeah, well, again, I don't know what the age of displacement is in your area, but I'm currently out at Mudgee, and I know that by late 1800s, the community had been largely displaced. So I want a 120-year-old grafted branch. Now,
Yeah.
I was on a project in Canberra end of last year, early this year, I can't remember, somewhere in that time. And one of the local community representatives said, well, you don't know what we've been doing since this could be modern. And the answer is yes, it could be. And I can't take away from that. But without any records, it's no different than any other tree that produces the same shapes without human invention. So, and trees do that. They form grafts. I've had them do 360s in the branch, all sorts of weird things on just stuff that I've planted. So if trees that I plant and trees that are planted in suburbia do these things, the question is, how do we have any confidence that it's a marker tree? And the next question is, who's it communicating and what is it communicating? So it's the same as a report, same requirement. If the community doesn't know what it's pointing to and there's no understanding of it, is it actually something that was communicating something? If it's an arrow in the rock, we get it as a Caucasian, but does the local community understand how it communicates? Now, it's not saying it can't be, but the presence of just a marker type thing doesn't make it. I mean, I see lots of shields and coolamons at the side of the road, often made by cars hitting them. That doesn't make them culturally significant. And when you start saying, oh, look, that could be a canoe tree, or that could be a shield tree, or that could be a coolamon tree, and it's not, what you're doing is you're watering down the culture. You're not preserving anything, you're actually damaging it. So, and I have fairly strong views on that. I want to see genuine things and things that I can say to my children, this is genuine and why. And the number of times I see things like, oh, this is a shield tree, and I look and say, well, it's a 30-year-old wound, so I'm not sure what community was functioning. It could be a modern replica, and that's important, but it's important for a whole different reason. It's important because it's showing that the culture is continuing. It's not important for something that should be set aside to say, hey, look, children, this is how your forebears did this to this tree.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look, with the grafting points, if you've got a tree that's got like 20 of them, would there be any biological reason for a tree to do that apart from having a lot of parenchyma or something?
It's a very broad Camaldulensis that you showed me, and just branches growing. A tree gets stressed, young branches start to form again and grow upwards. So you'll often see epicormics form them. And the other thing is, if it's a marker tree, you've got to ask the question again, who's it communicating to? If it's at 12 meters in height, it's probably not a marker tree. It might be something that the community observed, but it's not something that the community made. It's like saying that rock outcrop there, when you see the rock outcrop for the first time start veering to the south, that's not the same thing as saying that rock outcrop was put there by the community. And if we're talking about marker trees, we're talking about trees that were deliberately altered by human intervention.
Yeah, which obviously that wouldn't happen above accessible height.
Above eye height, where you're going to see it when you're walking, where you might see it from a particular vantage point. So there's got to be some logic to why. And the other thing is, I don't know about you, but grafting eucalypts is a real difficult process. And, you know, in the earlier days, we struggle with it. We're getting better at it. But it's very much a trial and error process. So, you know, they weren't going backwards and forwards, you know, checking it out every 3 months. And it was a simply try it and hopefully it pulls off. Because that's how grafting works today for most of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
and
did you also see the growths on some of the branches? It's kind of looked like a stalagmite coming off the
yeah,
branches, growing vertically
yeah.
down.
So old bits of branches, it's a very broad tree, old bits of branches that have been occluded, and also growth on the underside of branches near the trunk is often fastest. So when you get another branch on the underside there, it gets eliminated and you end up with these distortions. So it looked pretty normal. It didn't look like anything that... Now, if those bits pointing down were of any significance, it's where the gold is buried. Go have a dig. Again, it just has to make some form of sense culturally. And for that, you do need to ask the local communities how that would have communicated. And, you know, there's a certain frustration because a lot of communities have lost that information. So even if there was something to communicate, that's gone. And that does make it a frustration. You've got to weigh up that, as I said, against the other evidence, like how old is the branch, how old is the tree. And I looked at one at Morn on the border of New South Wales and Queensland, sort of a little bit north east of where you are, I think, Niels. And the local community said, look, we think it might be, we'd like to have it explored to see whether it is a culturally modified tree. I looked at it from Google Street View and said, wow, it's occluding incredibly fast. So I would have expected it to have been occluded by now, but let's explore it more. And we did. I went down, I asked the council if they had any photographs from the southern side of the river to the north where the tree was. And they said, we'll have a look. And I got a call back about an hour later saying, yes, we found one, we'll send it to you. And the photograph came through, and can you believe the tree wasn't there in the 1950s? So I was really confident. Now, that was a Camaldulensis with a 700 odd millimeter diameter trunk.
Yeah.
And so the likelihood that that was a culturally modified tree was zero.
Yeah.
And I suspect that probably 90% of the trees that are identified as culturally modified trees are not. It's just that we would like them to be, or they look like they've got the shape. And the unfortunate thing is, as I said, when a Holden Commodore hits them, it makes the same shape. When a Bobcat hits them, it makes the same shape. And that's to do with the vascular alignment of the tissue. You happy with that?
Yeah, no, heaps good. Thank you.
Okay, good. And I will show the pictures next time round so that you've seen them. Next one is interested to discuss Phytophthora. A colleague was contacted by a demolition company and has to be removed affected root material and soil. Look, I don't ever understand people, so you can't ask me questions like that. Phytophthora is an oomycete. It's a funny little thing. We used to say they were fungi. They're not. They're closely related, but they have a cellulose cell wall, not a chitin cell wall. They have a motile spore, so a zoospore that has a flagella, so it looks like semen and it can swim in water. But to think that you can somehow or other remove it all is pretty unlikely. The amount of material that you'd remove would be fairly heavy. If it was right beside something that was really critical, the Wallamai State Forest, right beside one of the stands of Wallamai pines, I might sort of understand that. But I would say that was probably an excessive thing. There are things you can do to bias against Phytophthora, so things that can help your trees respond better. but we can't eradicate it. We don't have a way of doing that effectively without sterilising the soil. Sterilising the soil would have been another option in situ. But again, I don't know why the condition was made, but I would tend to believe that it was probably highly ineffective, because if you're getting inoculum in the soil, it's going to be on the tracks of the excavator, it's going to be on the bucket of the excavator, it's going to be washed around in the next rain, it's going to be stirred up in dust. I often describe Phytophthora as one of those ubiquitous fungi in suburbia. It's spread everywhere already. If you go out, I think, into the middle of most national parks and took enough samples, you'll find Phytophthora. Where people have been, it's going to tend to be there. And it's easy enough to spread. If you want to know how far dust can move, it can move, hundreds and hundreds of kilometres. So, to think that you can exclude it by going in and excavating is probably not a reality. But as I said, there may be something really critical beside where they've asked for this. I'd need to get some more information. Whose question was that? Are you online?
That was mine, Vicky.
Yeah. Okay, Vicky, explain.
Stuart rang me and sent me a report that said the trees had to be removed because there's Phytophthora. He didn't think there was any evidence that there'd been any testing. So how do we know there's Phytophthora?
Oh, yeah,
But the demolition guy rang him, and I've seen the conditions of consent from Inner West Council saying that the excavator has to, the demolition company has to remove all plant material and soil that's contaminated on the site. And he's ringing Stuart saying,
I would have said that was probably, from my perspective, a fairly, if I say, overreactive or ill-informed decision. For a starter, the tree's got Phytophthora. Well, Phil, do you remember going out to Hawkesbury and seeing the platanus with Phytophthora lesions at the base of it when we did the? Yeah, it's still there. Kat's nodding because she's seen it as well. We have this view that Phytophthora is also the end of the world. It's fairly common. Lots of plants that are healthy deal with it well. The other thing that it doesn't do well is it's not a very good pathogen. It needs, it's not a primary pathogen. It's not an initial pathogen that comes in and kills off everything like Armillaria ludobobaluna. It needs environmental factors to get to its stage. So stress, usually dry followed by real wet, poor drainage, or it's going to be an indicator species, something like xanthoreas. Xanthoreas and Phytophthora just do not belong together. If you plant xanthoreas, you will get Phytophthora if it's in the area, and you'll see it, they turn pale and then they die.
I think this was a large Norfolk Island pine, and I don't remember what the second tree was.
I would say I'd have wanted more information. But again, this is that process of how well you communicate. Somebody's got that, read that, and said, yes, okay, well, that needs to go. I went out to a school a little while ago, and there was a heritage hoop pine that was removed because it was splitting. And, this is a tree with a metre and a bit diameter trunk, and I'm thinking, wow, I don't think I've ever seen that in Araucaria. And what it turns out was the tree had a codominant stem, and the arborist genuinely believed that that codominant stem meant the tree was actively failing and it had to be removed. And, I've seen those decisions on a number of occasions in the last 12 months, where an arborist genuinely believes, and there's nothing like genuine belief to, as I said, to put fear into somebody who doesn't understand. And I'm going to say something, and council arborists, please don't get upset with me. But, councils aren't employing the best of the best. They're employing who they can get. And so the level of arboricultural knowledge is not going up generally. It's plateaued or going down in some areas well and truly. The quality of education is shortened, and the demand has increased. So you're getting this thinning or watering down of knowledge. And that's part of why we do ArborMentor, is to try and fill in some of those gaps. It's a definite problem. And so just because they work for a council does not mean they're the best arborist. I have seen council arborists that I just sit there and shake my head and think, why and how? And the answer is that there weren't a lot of applicants, and the council said, better one than not. And I can say that in respect. I've got a son who is not ever going to be a consulting arborist. That's just the reality. And he applied for a job as a council consultant, as a tree inspector, level 5 qualifications required. And they said, if you can't get the right person, we're happy to have you trained and on staff getting trained whilst you're doing your job. And I thought, yep, okay. So it'll be 2 years before he gets his qualification. There's 2 years of making decisions without adequate knowledge. And that was, the council just felt that it wasn't going to get a suitable applicant. Fortunately, he didn't get the job. And fortunately for them, because he would have never finished his diploma. Does that make sense, Vicky? So
Yeah, so I don't know.
I would have said it's highly unlikely that it was Phytophthora.
Yeah.
If it was Phytophthora, then the question is, why wouldn't you manage and treat? So, you know, one of the phosphonates or something like that. You know, hell, I did something really horrible the other day. I even recommended a person use aspirin. Aspirin is salicylic acid. It's actually acetyl acetic acid. Acetic acid is a natural hormone in trees or plants that stimulates their defense system. And the plant can convert aspirin, the acetyl form, back into salicylic acid. So I said, look, let's just try stimulating the system using aspirin. And it's a brachychiton. I'm almost sure it's got Phytophthora. There's another one that once it gets it, because it's a pathogen, it gets in and the parenchyma is really susceptible. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
So yeah, look.
How did you give it the dose? Like, not a tablet with a glass of water, obviously.
1 tablet, 4 litres, applied on the foliage to saturation into the soil.
On the foliage.
Yeah, it's absorbed through the foliage. It's absorbed through the parenchyma. Of course, on a brachychiton, you've got so much parenchyma in the trunk, right to the outside edge. I think, yeah, there've probably been some benefit, Peter, in adding something like penetrine, but or one of the bark penetrants. But I think when you start giving something like that to a client, you're really pushing it. So, a couple of drops of ordinary household detergent, just as a surfactant, and then your aspirin. If you're really smart and you want to do it experimentally, like Bartlett did in the UK, you can't go out and use aspirin. You can't really tell people to do that. So you just get willow and you chip them. And I really think there's a massive market for willow chip to be used as a part of the treatment program. And a guy called Glyn Percival, many of you will have heard of him, who works for Bartlett in the UK, runs Bartlett Labs UK. Glyn did some really good research a number of years ago on willow chip as a treatment product for a disease, a biotic disease. And I think that's really got some advantages. So who knows, maybe all those willow plantations beside, or outgrowths beside the creek might have some value.
Mark,
Yes.
just on that, would that be more concentrated in the foliage or the xylem or anything in particular? Or?
I just spray it over the foliage, and you've got a smooth bark tree over the stem. It's commonly used in horticulture. Orchid growers again often use it. It's just one of those nice simple remedies that biases. It's like the phosphonates. Phosphoric acid is not about killing the organism. It's about changing the way the plant cells grow. That biases the favour towards the host. So the host side of the disease triangle, there's three sides: host, environment, and the organism. It's biasing it towards the host. And that's what we want. We want trees that are better able to resist. The other thing about Phytophthora, Vicky, is it really is such a pathetic player in the pathogenic scheme and the saprophytic scheme is when it gets with mulch, just the natural fungi in mulch are very antagonistic, as are mycorrhizal fungi to Phytophthora. So James Downer did a lot of work on that 25, 30 years ago. You can go look him up. Just mulching around a tree will help reduce the incidence of Phytophthora. So, yeah, I think they could have addressed that problem in lots of other ways. But again, I'm not privy to all the information, and you might not be either, or it might have simply been something that was completely misunderstood. And that wouldn't surprise me either. It could have been the chemical waste you often get in old development sites. And Phil, you would have come across this. People have treated under their house for termites with chlordane, and you've got to take away contaminated soil that's got, hydrocarbons and all those sort of things in it. It may have been that someone switched two bits together and put it together in a unique way that shouldn't have been, and it's just been a misunderstanding. But I see things come out of all sorts of places that make my head turn. And I dare say people look at some of the things that I write and look at it and say, the guy's clearly unhinged. So we've been at it for an hour and a half, guys. I'm happy to call it quits unless there's a pressing question.
Thanks so much, and thanks Phil, for the info. It was really good.
And thanks, Phil, for coming along, and hopefully we'll see you again on the odd occasion. It wasn't that bad, was it?
No, I'd love to. Yeah, it's really good. I just tend to stick my head down and not do anything to do with the industry. So
the collective minds of others is far more powerful than one mind.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I'll see you at the next ArborMentor.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Thanks,
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you.